ACT English, More Comprehension in Less Time. This is part 3 of our series on the English section of the ACT exam, and we're in the middle of punctuation. This is Ken Boyd, the owner of St. Louis Test Preparation. You'll see our email address and our phone number listed here, and our website is at the end of the presentation. So we went on from commas in the last part, to semicolons in this part of the review, some common uses. Use a semicolon between independent clauses not joined by a coordinating conjunction. You can again think of those independent clauses as little separate sentences, standalone sentences. Think of that as a clause. For example, the museum has 4 exit doors, semicolon, the gift shop has 1. On both sides of that semicolon, you can almost think of them as separate sentences, but unlike a comma, there is no coordinating conjunction in the middle like and, but, something like that. Use a semicolon between independent clauses joined by a transitional word, also called like a conjunctive adverb. For example, the words also, finally, or indeed are examples of these types of adverbs. Here's our sentence. High and low pressure systems often clash in the Midwest, semicolon, thus there are frequent storms. Okay? Those type of adverbs are a tip-off to use a semicolon. You'll also note that the word thus has a comma after it, so it's another tip-off that the punctuation needed before the word thus might be different than another comma. Going on with more other common uses. Use a semicolon to separate coordinate clauses if the clauses themselves don't have commas in them. If the clauses themselves do have commas in them. This gets back to the point that I made on the last slide. Think of each clause as a standalone sentence. If one of those clauses contains a comma, it's likely that you wouldn't connect them with another comma. If so, you need some other type of punctuation to separate the clauses. Otherwise, it would just be too many commas and look a little too messy. Here's an example. The company paid for Jim's airfare, hotel, and mileage expenses, semicolon, but the meetings he attended were not productive. If we put another comma after expenses, the flow of the sentence wouldn't be very good, and it would look a little haphazard with so many commas and not some types of different punctuation. There are some less frequent uses that you'll see a little less on the exam and that are a little harder to spot. Use semicolons to separate items in a series when the items contain internal punctuation. That means that the items themselves have commas. Here's our hint. If the sentence already contains commas and colons, you'll need to use different punctuation to separate the items. Here's what I mean by that. The pair included Chris, who was the most valuable player in 1981, 84, and 85, semicolon, and another great player named Vince. Okay? The word and is pulling together those two pieces of the sentence, and you'll see that the first piece has a comma after the word Chris and after 1981. So it makes sense to separate the two pieces of that sentence with something other than a comma. When not to use semicolons. A semicolon is not used to separate clauses and phrases from a main clause. A little hard to explain. Here's our example. Many forms of wildlife are becoming extinct, semicolon, because of the encroachment of humans on the animal's territory and habitat. Now, if you read that sentence, as I've said in past lectures, you probably wouldn't pause after the word extinct, so it probably doesn't require punctuation. And you'd be right, we need to remove the semicolon after the word extinct. If you read the passage out loud, you probably wouldn't pause after the word extinct. As a result, it may not need punctuation. Some other tips. Don't use a semicolon. Remove semicolons that introduce a series or explanation, similar to a rule that we had for commas back in part 2. When you're introducing something, you're going to use different punctuation. We packed the items we needed for the trip, semicolon, and here's our list: sleeping bags, rain gear, and a waterproof tent. Instead of a semicolon, we'd use a colon or a dash to introduce that list. We had the introducing the list concept back in the comma discussion on the prior video. Here's our bibliography, lots of great resources at the bookstore. I happen to be using the Barron's edition of the ACT from 2008. You also have the ACT website. That's the end of part 3. You'll find part 4 on YouTube of the English exam. And for live tutoring sessions, we do several cities. We will also have live chats on the net, www.stltest.net. See you next time.